What is up, Blender players? We're back on take 3 of this video, because I can't seem to fucking get it right. Point is, there's these things on Twitter, there's these things they're on Reddit as well, of people doing these kind of perfect psychedelic loops of different variations of doing stuff with cubes, and I thought it'd be interesting to make our own kind of a variation on these existing ones and show you how to make it. So for this one, I'm going to be taking some cubes, kind of making them kind of converge to the corners, flipping it on its own cube, and then somehow it resets and it's a perfect loop. I don't know how it works. Anyways, let's hop into Blender and get started. So I'm using Blender version 2.83. You could use 2.9, you could use 2.7. It really doesn't matter. Point is, we have the default scene with the cube and everything, and the first thing we want to do is that segmentation idea. So we need to convert this into 8 voxels, which you can either do in edit mode by doing some weird stuff. I don't recommend this. We're actually going to do it with modifiers, and in fact, if we add in 3 array modifiers, we'll be able to do exactly that. So modifiers tab, add in a array modifier, which automatically creates a duplicate on the x-axis. We're going to do this again now for the y-axis, but right now it's just duplicating the double, making 4 cubes, as you can see, so 2 long ones. We want this to be on the y-axis, so change the number to 1 on the y-axis, so now we have a 2x2 grid. And then finally, you guessed it, to go into the z dimension, we need to add in yet another array modifier. This one on the z-axis and 0 on x, so now we have a 2x2x2 voxel kind of situation. Once you have this, we are going to apply all these array modifiers, and long story short, we want this to kind of be a perfect loop in every sense, so we need to take this big cube that's composed of cubes and somehow recenter it so it takes up the same space as the original cube. You understand what I'm saying. How do we do that? What we're gonna do is we're gonna move this on the x-axis by -1 because we doubled it. That's why it's the number -1. It makes sense when you think about it, but we're also doing this on y and z. You just gotta trust me. The process is fundamentally flawed and we can't really understand all of it. What we need to do is we need to split this into individual shapes, because right now in edit mode, you can see it kind of looks like it, but technically it's one object over here. We need to segment it. How do we do that? In edit mode, you can run the separate command, and we can separate by loose parts. And even though these look side by side, they're technically detached from each other, so now we get all these cubes, which now we can do that thing from before. So objects, set origin, and then origin to geometry. Now, you might be thinking, origin to geometry. We made it, we did it, we can now scale it down. No, you can't. Why? Because if you set this to individual origins and you scale, these do scale individually and they do the thing, but not from the corners, which means when we rotate the cube, it's not gonna look exactly quite right. So instead of scaling from the middle, for this cube, for example, we want it to scale from this corner. So how do we change the origin of each object to be the corner? The answer is with a lot of work. Okay, so the way we do this is edit mode, edit mode, you hit tab to do that. I'm gonna select this vertex because this is where I want the origin to be. We're gonna hit Shift S, and that's gonna let us move the cursor to selected. So now I've moved the cursor, it's kind of like a 3D placeholder. And what we can do with this now is object, set origin, and then origin to 3D cursor. So now it's actually scaling from the corner. So I'm just gonna do that a couple more times so you can see what I'm doing. Edit mode, Shift S, cursor to selected, object, set origin, origin to 3D cursor. If you do it really fast, you can almost wrap it. In fact, I'll show you. Edit mode, vertex, Shift S, cursor to selected, and then go to origin, set origin to 3D cursor. And you do all of that 8 times, so I'm just gonna speed through that now. Dude, this take is chaotic as fuck. For real. Okay, I think I'm on the last one, but I wasn't counting. I was kind of zoning out because I hate this so much. But I think this is the last one. Set origin to 3D cursor. Let's check. That's all in the corners. I know the top layers are also in the corner, which now means if we go to the camera view, by the way, you might have noticed that before I was talking about, putting the cube in the same place and scaling it down and never did it. Now we can actually do that. So first what I'm going to do is Shift S, cursor to world origin. So now it's in the middle. Select all of your cubes. We're going to scale those down to the 3D cursor by 0.5. So now it's actually taking up the same space as the cube, but the point is of moving the origins is now if we set this to individual origins, we can now scale by the corners, which is what we want. So keyframe, we're gonna keyframe the scale, not scale the keyframe. Do that, frame 30, scale it down to let's say 0.5, keyframe, change this project length to be that, and boom, we have a cyclic animation. So this is part 1 of the process. Part 2 is, of course, taking this and projecting it back on an original cube, which somehow loops back to the beginning and everything will work. But long story short, we've set it up and now we just need to render this part and move on to part 2. For rendering, you basically turn this into a video, but there's one thing I want you to notice. In the render tab, what we're gonna do, so this is what it looks like, the render. What I want you to do is in color management, please set this to standard. If you don't do this, you're gonna run into an issue of kind of blending the 2 takes together. The shades of gray are going to be a bit different for a technical reason I don't want to talk about. Set this to standard and we're going to be gooch. And then also let's export this as a 30 frames per second video. In my case, I'm gonna be using an MP4, but as long as you're consistent, it really doesn't matter. So I'm gonna save this on the desktop, call it something like Amazing Name 1, and hit render. And then you just wait for the fruits of your labor to ripen. Okay, the render is done. We can move on to part number 2, which is projecting this on a cube, doing the rotation, and then, you know, editing these together back to back. To do that, I'm actually gonna start a new Blender project. Yes, you can leave everything you've done behind. Sometimes the only way to move forwards is by leaving something behind. But you're gonna notice that this already has our default cube in the same position as all the things we scaled down. So long story short, we just need to project this on here. To do that, we're gonna create a material. I'm gonna use an image texture node, which yes, you can put a video on an image texture node, contrary to the name. We're gonna load that in, and currently it's gonna be looking a bit weird, and that's because of the UV map. Don't worry about it. Point is, if we enable auto refresh, we can actually pick what frame we want of this animation. Make sure to pick the last one. That's the reason I had to do another take, because I forgot to do that. So for me, it's frame 30, because that was the last frame of the animation. And again, the reason this looks weird is the UV unwrap is a T. It's a T instead of being from the same perspective. To fix this, go to your camera view, you project from view, and now it's actually kind of conformed to the cube as you'd expect, because it's going from the camera view. But if you look at the rendered thing, it looks correct, other than the distortion, which Blender can't seem to fix. I've looked at so many forums and they never fix this thing. You can either subdivide to get rid of this distortion, so not caps lock, but literally subdivide to get rid of this distortion. Another way to do it without this kind of destructive thing is modifier, add in a subsurf or subdivision surface, which when we bump this up, you can see the distortion goes down at least a bit. So once you've gotten to this point, we're gonna go back to the shading workspace, make sure this is set to 30. And one thing you are gonna notice that's looking a bit weird is yes, we do have the nice projection where it's supposed to be, but also the faces on the back have that as well. And we want this thing to rotate so that it has a normal cube on the other side, because that's how the original begins, if you remember. To fix that, we are going to select these 3 faces. We are going to invert the selection, so we have the other 3 selected, and here we need to add a different material. To do this, material tab, add another material slot with a new material. This one's just going to be blank. It's going to be the default material, and we're just going to assign. Long story short, we now have 2 materials, one with the projection, one with the not the projection, and we just want to rotate from one to the other. Okay, so let's do exactly that, and we're going to have this process also take 30 frames as well. So let's keyframe the rotation, go to frame 30, which we want to be the last frame, and we're just going to rotate this so it's facing the other side, 180, and then also rotate on the y-axis by -90. Keyframe. Boom, what do you got? You got the thing going back to the original position of the first animation. It loops. That's the whole idea. And now let's render this and put them side by side. If you go to the render tab, make sure that this is set to standard again so that we have consistency from one shot to the other. And then we are just going to export this using the same setting. So again, it doesn't matter necessarily what you picked, but it is nice to have consistency so you don't have one that's compressed and one that's not. You have the same take from one to the other. So I'm just going to name this good. What did I call it? I called it Amazing Name number 2. Hit render, and again, just wait for this to finish doing its thing. I've almost made it. I hope I didn't fuck up. Okay, we've done it, and now we have Amazing Name number 1, Amazing Name number 2, and we just combine them back to back, and hopefully, if I didn't fuck up, everything will work. So let's start up another Blender project. Yes, we can leave this behind. No need for it. And we're gonna add in a movie being the first one. So look for Amazing Name number 1. And again, the reason we're doing this here is, yes, DaVinci is a video editor. Yes, Premiere is a video editor. Yes, Windows Movie Maker is an editor, but Blender has a built-in one, and let's do it all in Blender. So shot 1 is gonna be these cubes getting smaller. We go to the last frame where it's no longer present. We add in shot number 2, which is Amazing Name number 2. And then these kind of transition from one to the other. So if we set this to 60 frames, you can see now we have a perfect loop that blends from one to the other, and it just kind of keeps on going forever. That's pretty cool, right? And I showed you how to do that. Anyways, I hope you enjoyed this tutorial. That's the show. And yeah, see ya. You know, what an adventure that was. I hope you enjoyed that free tutorial. If you did, and I'm just tagging this piece of footage to the end because I forgot to talk about this because I tried to leave it at the end. If you enjoyed this tutorial and you want to support more like this and the CG Matter tutorial, Patreon is the best way to keep these 2 channels afloat. There are already like 430-ish patrons that are already generously being patrons. And I say generously because they're being patrons, but maybe it's not so generous because they also get behind the scenes access. They get the blend files for a lot of the projects I make. They also get exclusive tutorials that are not posted on YouTube, and that all depends on the tier you're on. But either way, Patreon exists if you're interested. You're not required to do it at all. It's just I want you to know about it. So there you go. Now that's the show.